All right, everybody, how's it going out there? So in this video, I'm going to close read our poem Henri Cole's Oil and Steel, just to demonstrate some elements of close reading that I want us to practice throughout the course when we read and engage in our short stories and poems and the play, etc. All right, so here's our homepage. Again, there's the hello from me, the syllabus and syllabus video. Hopefully, you've read all that. The discussion board guidelines. I'm going to upload a few notes on poetry here soon. So let's go to our week one introduction on Recall, the short story, paper one handout, and first discussion board. And if you click the drop down box, you see these dates. Here we have the Henri Cole poem Oil and Steel. And I'm going to pull up the Word doc so we can do a little bit of work on it. All right, so here it is. Here is the poem Henri Cole's Oil and Steel. Cole is a contemporary poet. He's late 60s. He teaches at Claremont College in California, and he recently bought a house in Stonington Borough. All right. Uh, Here's Cole's Oil and Steel. My father lived in a dirty dish mausoleum, watching a portable black and white television, reading the Encyclopedia Britannica, which he preferred to modern fiction. One by one, his schnauzers died of liver disease, except the one that guarded his corpse found holding a tumbler of Bushmills. Dead is dead, he would say, an anti-preacher. I took a plaid shirt from the bedroom closet and some motor oil, my inheritance. Once I saw him weep in a courtroom, neglected, needing nursing. This man who never showed me much affection, but gave me a knack for solitude, which has been mostly useful. All right, that's the poem. And if we were in class in person, what I always do when we read a poem, we read it like at least 3 times. We read the poem 3 times out loud to hear it, to kind of know what's going on. And I also do this. So in class, and I'm going to close read, but I want you to do this as well. So I want you to do 3 things. So you would underline a line that jumps out, you feel is important, and then in a sentence or two, why, right? And then the next part I would like you to do, circle a line that you feel is a little confusing, and then in a sentence or two, why. 3, how well do you understand the action of the poem on a scale of 1 to 10? And what I mean by action of the poem, not like what does it all mean, right? Not that like what does it all mean? Basically, what's going on in the poem. Do you understand what's going on in the poem? And I think at first, when we read poems, they're different than short stories, novels, plays. I think once we read it a few times and talk about it, it'll become a little clearer. And then also, this is what you should definitely always do. Look up any words you don't know. So do that as well. So let's jump right in. So let's look at the beginning of this poem. My father lived in a dirty dish mausoleum. What the hell's a dirty dish mausoleum, right? What does that mean? I don't think the father literally lives in a mausoleum, right? A mausoleum is a stone structure in the cemetery that you pass by that houses dead folks, right? My father lived in a dirty dish mausoleum. Uh, what I always, imagine that. What is that? Dirty dish. So there's dirty dishes piled up, right? There's dirty dishes piled up. What is a mausoleum? It's a house of the dead. So we'll look at that a little bit further. But this first line, we're in like capital P poetry here, right? This is a metaphorical line. We know the father doesn't literally live in a dirty dish in a mausoleum, but that's how the speaker is describing it. And what I used to do too when I taught this poem in class, I would have students draw the structure you think the father lives in. You know, what do you see? Do you see a rundown, dilapidated house, a small, kind of dirty apartment? I always see a trailer. But I love the fact that the poet, the speaker, doesn't give us the exact image, right? Because it lets our mind draw the image. The poem would be a lot different if it opened, "My father lived in a shitty trailer," right? That crystallizes the image. Here, it pushes it out. And let's return to this, right, in a moment. We'll talk about this a little more. And I always do this too when you have a block here, a strophe. The poem's not broken up into stanzas or lines. I always look at, what's the first end of the first sentence. So let's look at the first 4 lines, and we'll do this. My father lived in a dirty dish mausoleum, watching a portable black and white television, reading the Encyclopedia Britannica, which he preferred to modern fiction. So the father's living, lived is past tense too, right? So the father, and we know a little bit lower that the father has passed away. So the father lived in this dirty dish mausoleum, so we can imagine dirty dishes piled up. The place probably isn't the cleanest. And he did watch a portable black and white television. And this poem, it's from 1997 from the book Blackbird and Wolf. But why is he watching a black and white television, portable black and white television? Is the father, and we can kind of look at this, the father, and we can see this with a lot of older men, is he a man stuck in his ways? Everything's black and white. Things are stuck in his ways. And he would read the Encyclopedia Britannica. What the hell does it mean to read the Encyclopedia Britannica? Right? I mean, there are facts there, but if you read an encyclopedia from, say, the 1950s, some of those things will still be true, but some of those won't be true. The father might be stuck in the past a little bit, right? Which he preferred to modern fiction. So he watches his black and white TV, reads this Encyclopedia Britannica. In many ways, the father is seemingly stuck in the past. Whereas the speaker, this assumes or presumes the speaker reads modern fiction here, right? So we get this early portrait of the father as a man living in this dirty dish mausoleum, and I want to return to this mausoleum in a moment, watching this portable black and white television, reading the encyclopedia, which he prefers. He prefers the simple things, to be stuck, to live how he's living. And then let's look at this next part. Let's look at this middle part right here. One by one, his schnauzers died of liver disease, except the one that guarded his corpse, found holding a tumbler of Bushmills. Dead is dead, he would say, an anti-preacher. All right, one by one. So what are schnauzers? Look up schnauzers if you don't know the schnauzers. That's that little dog with the little beard, right? The schnauzers died of liver disease. Why did the schnauzers die of liver disease? Except the one that guarded his corpse. So the last schnauzer didn't die because good old dad croaked first, right? And the dad was holding a tumbler. A tumbler is a small glass of Bushmills, right? What's Bushmills? Look up Bushmills if you don't know. It's a Irish whiskey, 90 proof Irish whiskey. It's not a cheap whiskey. It's not the best whiskey. I think I would argue it's a little bit above mid-grade whiskey. So, and I'm going to argue too here, why did the schnauzers die of liver disease? So, the father, here's my argument. The father would watch his black and white television, have the encyclopedia. He'd pour himself out a tumbler of Bushmills. And I'm going to argue he would also pour his doggies a little bit of this whiskey here too. So the doggies were his drinking buddies, right? The dogs drank the Bushmills with the father, and obviously That did not do them well, and they died. I'm curious, one by one, how many schnauzers are we talking about here? At least three, right? Uh, I remember when I first read this, it was one of those moments where I like laughed a little bit. It's some dark black humor here, but it's then you catch yourself. What am I laughing about? Because the father, and this is one of the paradoxes here, right? The contradictions. The father obviously loves his schnauzers and wants his schnauzers for companions one by one. And it's important, and I want to return to this in a moment too, the fact that we are using these specific nouns here, schnauzers and bushmills. I want to return to that in a moment. But the father obviously loves his dogs, right? They're his companions, his drinking buddies, but he's also poisoning them. He wants them to be his companions, drinking buddies, but he's also poisoning them. And it reminds me of a great statement. Professor I had at URI, Mary Capello, the brilliant writer, she said, it's one of these like banal, boring statements, but we all know it. Our family, right? The people that are supposed to love us and protect us and care for us the most are also the ones that hurt us the most. So the father obviously loves the schnauzers, but he's also poisoning them. And you can see, though, that the last schnauzer cared about the father because it guarded his corpse, right? So we have that schnauzer part, and I want to return to that in a moment. I love this statement here, right? What does this mean? This is the only these three words are the only quote from the father in the poem. Dead is dead, he would say, an anti-preacher. That's like the father's philosophy, his outlook, his maxim on life. What does that mean, dead is dead? And I'm fascinated about, dead is dead. Once you're dead, you're dead. And what's an anti-preacher? So, and reading this poem, I'm going to argue on the surface, it's seemingly simple. But I'm going to also argue that there is much more below and beneath the surface. And it's fascinating when we read this the first time, and how do we look at this statement? Is this good? Is it positive? Or is it bad? Negative? Right? How do we read this? And I'm fascinated because in the poem, the speaker of the poem doesn't say, dead is dead, and we bring subjectively our own ideas how we read this. If we're religious, right, plug in any religion, dead is dead. No, if you're Christian or plug in whatever, once you're dead, you're not dead, right? It's not over. You go to wherever, right, and life continues, etc., etc. And if you believe that, this statement would be carried somewhat negative connotations. However, if you don't believe that, right? If you're like, this life is all we have. Once we're dead, we're dead. That's not necessarily a negative thing if you don't believe that. This life we have to make most of what it is, etc., etc. Another way you can read this statement, I'm going to argue this is more poetic. It is what it is, right? It is what it is. And an anti-preacher. What the hell's an anti-preacher? A preacher, and growing up in the 80s, I have all these negative connotations about preachers. Jimmy Swaggart, send me your money. Send me Joel Osteen living in that huge mansion, right? So I don't always, and you can also think of a preacher, someone preaching at you. We have our famous Madonna song, Papa Don't Preach, right? When someone's preaching at you, an anti-preacher is not promising you anything, not telling you anything, right? This is fascinating. This comes we're in like what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Basically the middle of the poem, we have the father's philosophy, the statement here. Dead is dead, he would say, an anti-preacher. I'm also fascinated with this statement too, because we have a bit of irony in this statement, right? Because dead is dead, an anti-preacher. What are we doing in this poem? The poem was written in 1997. The father died before that. We're in this year now, and this whole poem's about the father. We're talking about the father. The father is dead, but we're in here talking about him, arguing about him, reading this meticulously crafted sonnet on the Father. So really, the Father is living in the poem in some ways. Oh, right. So that's the first part. We get that part there, a portrait of the Father. And I'm going to argue we have this early portrait of the Father, which maybe is a little distant, a little cold. Is the Father an alcoholic? Seemingly he drank himself to death. He poisoned the schnauzers to death, schnauzers that he loved. The Father an alcoholic, cold, lonely. And that's another thing I want to look at in this poem. When we read all poems, what does the speaker want? Think about this when we read all of our poems. What is the speaker trying to do? That's it's written for a reason, right? So let's look at the second part. I took a plaid shirt from the bedroom closet and some motor oil, my inheritance. What's going on here? I like to think about this moment in the poem too, right? And we can also do this. What's the relationship? What's the relationship between speaker and Father? And if we were in class, I would write this down, Father, and we would start to describe Father, right? And then speaker. They're obviously not close, right? They're not close. What's the old folks on Facebook say? It's complicated. The relationship status is complicated. However, after the Father dies, the speaker, it appears that they go to the dwelling place, the place where the Father lived, and is putting things in order. So the Father has passed away, and the adult child has gone to where the Father lived and is putting the effects in order. So in many ways, I hope none of your relationships are like this, but I have friends whose relationship with their parents are really, really not good. And they might get a call from the state. Oh, your dad passed away. They'd be like, well, hang up the phone. Tough shit. Take care of it. Right? So there's seemingly enough, I would say they're estranged, but there's seemingly enough of a relationship where the speaker feels compelled to go down and put the things in order. Right? What do you make of this? A plaid shirt from the bedroom closet and some motor oil. My inheritance. What's the Father do for a living? The Father is probably, he's definitely a blue collar worker. Could he be a mechanic? He does something with his hands. He works. Plaid shirt and motor oil. I'm fascinated too. We can juxtapose, compare and contrast. What do you think the Father's education level is? Perhaps high school, not college, right? And we'll contrast that with the speaker in a moment. I took a plaid shirt. Why are these things? That's another thing you could do when you look at poem. What are the things here? Look at the things in the poem. The plaid shirt, the motor oil, the schnauzers, the TV, the Bushmills. Why are they significant? Why is this the speaker's inheritance? And for the longest time, I didn't know how to read this line. And we realize, though, this isn't the true inheritance. The true inheritance is this knack for solitude, which we'll look at in a moment. Because how does one receive their inheritance? You don't take your inheritance, right? I took. You don't take your inheritance. You're given your inheritance. Those are the two key words there, right? I took a plaid shirt from the bedroom closet and some motor oil. My inheritance. I love this M dash here, this line here. For the longest time, I didn't know how to read this line. Is it sarcastic? Is it ironic? Or is it more somber? And I ultimately think it's somber because the tone of the poem, that's another thing you could look at, right? Let's keep adding to our list. What's the tone of the poem? What's the tone? I don't think it's not angry. It's not bitter. It's not like, and if you forgive me for cursing for a moment, when we're going to look at the structure of this poem, this is a sonnet. We have 14 lines. It's a meticulously crafted sonnet. I think if the writer, speaker, person who's speaking here wanted to write like a fuck you dad sonnet, they could. It's not that. It's not like dad was cold and rough, but I love him anyway. It's not that. On the flip side, it's not he was a bastard completely. It's kind of in the middle, right? It's kind of in the middle. But it's funny to think about these things too, because I don't think the speaker of this poem would have anything to do with a plaid shirt and some motor oil, but they remind the speaker of the father, and it's interesting to think about. What are the things that remind us of our parents? Things, usually not a big monetary item. It's like a thing, right? And this is the thing that reminded the speaker of the father. And I think this moment where the speaker is down wherever the father lives, putting the effects in order, there's a change in the poem. There's a change here, right? So let's look at this change to whereas the first part is seemingly cold, distant. We have a change with this moment. So and here we have the final 4 lines. Once I saw him weep in a courtroom, neglected, needing nursing. What's going on? We don't know what's going on, and I think this pisses a lot of readers off. We don't know what's going on. I'm going to argue something bad's going on. The father is in court for something bad, and it's once. Once I saw him weep in a courtroom, and think of weep. It's not sob, a tear, weep. The father is breaking down in the courtroom. Once I saw him weep in a courtroom, neglected, needing nursing. And I love the use of this M dash here to these lines, because what's the speaker do? Once I saw him weep in a courtroom, neglected, needing nursing. What's our first instinct when we see a loved one, a family member, a friend weeping? We want to go up to them and comfort them, right? The speaker just watches. You could initially take that as the speaker being cold, distant as well, or many of us we might be able to count on one hand with 2 fingers the times we saw our father cry, or maybe never. It could be so dramatically jarring, so overwhelming that you don't know what to do. You just stare. But in this moment too, this once I saw him weep in a courtroom, this contrasts the earlier parts where it really humanizes the father, right? Yeah, my dad was tough and cold, but I saw him weep and he was vulnerable. And then we get this ending here. Let's look at this. This man who never showed me much affection. So the father never showed the speaker much affection, but what do you make of that? It doesn't say any. He showed him maybe a little, but not much, but there's some affection there, right? This man who never showed me much affection. And then we have this ending. But gave me a knack for solitude, which has been mostly useful. What do you make of that? What's a knack for solitude? Do any of you have a knack for solitude? What's it mean to have a knack for solitude? Is it good to have a knack for solitude? Is this good? And for my money, this adverb mostly here is one of, if not the most important word in the poem. This man who never showed me much affection, here's the inheritance, but gave me a knack for solitude, which has been mostly useful. And I want to look at this moment. What's mostly? Is that good? Is that bad? When could mostly, is this good? Is mostly useful good or bad here? I mean, we wouldn't want a car or a cell phone or our internet to be mostly useful, right? However, think about this. There wouldn't be the poem. If we were to step back outside of the poem and look at the construction of the poem, if without this knack for, and all of you can think of this. Do any of you write, paint, do music, do any art, right? You're usually not doing it in the middle of a roaring party at 4 in the morning. You're alone. You need to cultivate this solitude. Without this knack for solitude, there would be no poem. It makes the speaker, the poet, who the poet is. So, in many ways, think about this with all of our parents. We might have tumultuous relationships, difficult relationships. We wouldn't be who we are without them. It made this person who the person is, this poem, right? If I didn't have this knack for solitude, I wouldn't be me. I wouldn't be able to create this poem. And when you think about this, I always want to argue this too. We have, how many lines do we have here? We have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. What's a 14-line poem? 14-line poem, that's a sonnet, right? We can think of our Shakespearean sonnets that follow a rhyme scheme. This doesn't follow a specific rhyme scheme, but we have off rhymes, mausoleum, television. And when you think of this poem, each word is meticulously placed, and this is a meticulously crafted poem. So whereas the father worked with his hands with the oil and the plaid shirt, the speaker works with these words, the poem, right? And traditionally, sonnets are love poems. Is this a love poem? Is this a love poem? And most of you, a lot of people, when I ask this, they're like, no, this isn't a love poem, because we're thinking of it how we would subjectively think of a love poem and how we define love. But is this a love poem between the speaker and father? Is this as much as they can show love, right? I'm going to argue this is a love poem. This isn't like, and I think this mostly, it makes the whole poem. It keeps that ambiguity, right? Because if it ended, this man who never showed me much affection but gave me a knack for solitude, which has been useful, that would tie it all up. That would tie it all up in a bow. It would say, this dad was rough, but, he gave me this knack for solitude, which is useful. So that would tie it all up, right? I don't like that. And similarly, if it ends with, this man who never showed me much affection but gave me a knack for solitude, which has never been useful. Man, that would be damning. That would damn the father. This mostly useful, it's in the middle. Sometimes it's useful. Well, it made me who I am to be able to write these poems. But it's also probably not so good in my own relationships, right? I kind of cultivate this solitude, aloneness. So you can also look at this in many ways. I don't know how, I hope we all love our parents and are close to our parents. I don't know if any of us want to be exactly like them. However, we all are a little bit like them, whether we want to or not. And you could think about this. What do we inherit? What's our inheritance from our parents? We have our literal physical inheritance, right? But then we have characteristics, mannerisms, emotions, psychological, philosophical outlooks. In many ways, I think the speaker is completely opposite of the father. But in many ways, I think there are characteristics inherited from the father too. This knack for solitude, this cultivation of aloneness. The speaker is educated, though. They read modern fiction, and you could look at the contrast with this Dirty Dish Mausoleum. I bet you the speaker's apartment house is neat, probably really fastidious, educated. They constructed this brilliant sonnet, I'm going to argue. I think we could also show little moments of love that might be hidden in the poem, or at least moments of acknowledgement. We have these specific nouns here. And here's some free creative writing advice for all of you writing poems, stories. Be specific. This is different. This would be different if it said, one by one his dogs, tumbler of booze, whiskey, liquor. It's specific. The dad loved schnauzers and he loved his Bushmills. For better or worse, he was a person. He had these things he liked. This defined him. And we might think of people, right? You might be a person or your family members. You have a dog that they always like dogs. They like poodles or whatever. Or this is my brand of beer or alcohol. So for better or worse, this was the father's identity. He loved schnauzers and he loved Bushmills, right? So let's go down. What's the speaker want in this poem? So, and I think we can fill these out. What's the speaker want trying to do? I'm going to argue, a lot of people might say, I think if they read it a little naively, they want a better relationship with the father. No, because that's over, and the speaker's old enough to know it's over, right? There's no going back. There's no going. The father's dead. There's no going back in the past and mending anything. It's fascinating to think about too, though, whenever, even when a person passes, the relationship is not over. You keep working on it. So in many ways, I'm going to argue the speaker is working through this difficult relationship. You can see the working through in the poem, right? The working through. It opens with kind of a distant, cold portrait. And then we have this statement, and then we have a turn here. This is the turn, right? And then when you think of a sonnet, usually a sonnet, the turn or volta is the ninth line. It could be in the last two. Look at the last two. This is the turn of the poem, right? This is where so in many ways, there's ambiguity. It resists complete closure, right? We don't get complete closure here, right? With this mostly useful. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not useful. However, there's a little closure in the fact that we know the knack for solitude is sometimes going to be useful and sometimes not going to be useful. So in many ways, the speaker is working through this difficult relationship with the father, reflecting on things and varied moments in the life, right? And they come up with this, and the end, right? This knack for solitude. I'm going to argue it's mostly useful, but there would be no poem without it. The speaker would not be who the speaker is without it. So in many ways, I think it works as a hard-won love poem with yeah, Dad, he wasn't the greatest. We weren't that close. But you know what? I realize now I receive this thing, this knack for solitude, which made me who I am and enables me to create sonnets and poems.